There are things that happen in childhood that never fade, no matter how old you get, because they weren't just scary. They were wrong, and even now, years later, I still don't have an explanation for what I saw when no adults were around to protect them. These are not ghost stories I heard from someone else, and they're not exaggerated nightmares shaped by imagination. They are moments that happened when I was young, when I was alone, vulnerable, and completely unprepared for the fear that crept in so quietly I didn't recognize it until it was already too late. And even today, when the house goes silent, those memories return with unsettling clarity, reminding me that some childhood experiences don't stay in the past. They wait. The first memory that still follows me begins in a house I haven't seen in years. A place that looked ordinary from the outside, but never truly felt safe once the sun went down. And I was young enough then to believe that fear had rules, that bad things only happened for clear reasons. But that night quietly rewrote everything I thought I understood, because my parents had gone out for what they promised would be a short time, leaving me alone in a house that suddenly felt far too large, every room stretching wider the moment the door closed behind them. And at first I tried to distract myself, turning on the television, sitting close to the screen as if noise alone could keep the unease away. But the silence between commercials felt heavy, pressing in from the corners of the room, and I remember noticing how the hallway leading to the bedrooms looked darker than usual. Not pitch black, just dim enough to hide details. And I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it, because children are taught early to doubt their instincts. And then I heard it, not a sound exactly, more like the absence of one. A sudden drop in background noise, so complete it made my ears ring, and my eyes locked on the hallway, as if something there had drawn my attention deliberately. And I waited, heart pounding, for the house to settle back into normalcy. But instead, the quiet deepened, and in that stillness I felt watched, not in a dramatic way, not like footsteps or shadows, but like awareness pressing against my back. And I remember standing up slowly, debating whether to call out, knowing somehow that speaking might make things worse. And that's when I heard a soft sound from my bedroom, a faint shift, like someone adjusting their weight on a mattress. And fear flooded me so suddenly my legs trembled, because no one else was supposed to be there. And I knew every sound that house usually made, every creak and groan, and this wasn't one of them. And I stood frozen, staring at the hallway as if movement would confirm what my mind was already screaming. And seconds stretched unnaturally long until the sound came again. Closer this time, followed by something far worse, a whisper, so quiet it barely existed, saying my name in a tone that felt careful, deliberate, and wrong. And I knew instantly it wasn't my parents, because it didn't carry warmth or familiarity, just recognition. And panic took over, my thoughts racing between hiding, running, or pretending I hadn't heard anything at all. And I chose the last option because it felt safest, because acknowledging it felt like permission. And I sat back down on the couch, turning the television volume up until it was uncomfortably loud, my eyes fixed on the screen while tears blurred my vision. And for several minutes, nothing happened, just noise and flickering light. Until I began to hope it was over. That fear had exaggerated everything, and that hope shattered when the whisper returned. This time from behind me, close enough that I felt breath against my ear, repeating my name slowly, as if tasting it, and I screamed, bolting for the front door without looking back, throwing it open and collapsing onto the porch, where I stayed sobbing until my parents' car headlights finally cut through the dark. And even after they searched the house and found nothing, even after they told me it was my imagination, something inside me had already changed. Because I learned that night that fear doesn't always come with proof, that sometimes it leaves nothing behind except certainty. And even now, decades later, when a house falls too quiet and my name echoes in my thoughts, I remember that hallway, that whisper, and the feeling that something knew me long before I was old enough to understand what that meant. The second memory comes from a different house, a smaller one, but somehow more suffocating. A place where the walls felt closer together and the night stretched endlessly. And I was a little older then, old enough to be left alone regularly, old enough that adults expected me not to be afraid anymore, which made the fear harder to explain when it arrived. And it always arrived the same way, quietly, during late afternoons when the sun dipped low and filled the rooms with long shadows that didn't seem to belong to anything solid. And it started with the soft, deliberate noises coming from the back of the house, usually from the laundry room or the spare bedroom, places no one had any reason to be in. And at first, I told myself it was pipes, or the house settling, because that's what adults always said. But these sounds had intention, pauses between them that felt measured, like whoever or whatever was making them was waiting to see if I would respond. And one afternoon, after hearing a faint tapping for nearly an hour, I finally worked up the courage to investigate, gripping a heavy flashlight like it could protect me. And as I moved down the narrow hallway, every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but curiosity mixed with the need to prove to myself that fear didn't control me anymore. And when I reached the spare bedroom, the door was open, though I was certain I had closed it earlier, and inside the room the air felt wrong, colder than the rest of the house, stale in a way that made my skin prickle. And as I stepped inside, the tapping stopped instantly, leaving a silence so abrupt it felt artificial. And that's when I noticed the closet door slowly moving, just slightly, swaying back and forth as if someone inside was breathing against it. And I stood there frozen, watching it move, waiting for logic to return, for anything to explain what I was seeing. And then the flashlight flickered, plunging the room into near darkness. And from inside the closet came a sound I can still hear clearly today, a soft mimicry of my own breathing, perfectly timed inhaling when I inhaled, exhaling when I exhaled, and terror, unlike anything I'd felt before, flooded through me, because it wasn't hiding anymore. It was copying me, learning me, and without thinking I ran, slamming the bedroom door behind me and locking myself in the bathroom, where I sat shaking on the floor until my parents came home. And when I tried to explain what happened, they found the spare bedroom exactly as it always was. The closet empty, the air warm, the house silent. And they told me fear can make children imagine things. But the sounds didn't stop after that day. They just changed, becoming more subtle, more personal, doors left slightly open when I was sure I'd closed them. My belongings moved just enough for me to notice. And the worst part was that whatever it was never followed me when adults were home. As if it understood rules I didn't, as if it knew when it was safe to watch. And eventually we moved, and I never heard the tapping again. But even now, when a room goes quiet and my breathing sounds too loud in my ears, I remember that closet, that perfect imitation, and the horrifying realization that something in that house had been paying very close attention to me. The third memory is the one I avoided thinking about for years. Not because it was the loudest or most dramatic, but because it was quiet in a way that made me doubt myself long after it happened. And I was staying at my grandmother's house that summer, a place filled with familiar smells and routines. The kind of home that should have felt safe by default. And for the first few days, everything was normal, until I started waking up in the middle of the night for no clear reason, my eyes snapping open as if someone had called to me without making a sound. And at first I blamed bad dreams, the unfamiliar bed, anything that allowed me to dismiss the pattern. But the awakenings continued, always at the same time, always with the same sensation of awareness pressing against me. And one night I noticed something that turned discomfort into dread. The hallway light outside my room was on, casting a thin line of brightness across the floor that hadn't been there when I went to sleep. And I remember lying still, staring at that strip of light, listening for movement, for proof that someone else was awake. But the house was completely silent, too silent for a place that held multiple sleeping adults. And then the light shifted, not abruptly, not like someone flipping a switch, but slowly, dimming and brightening, as if something were passing in front of it again and again. And fear tightened in my chest as I realized whatever was out there was lingering, not moving with purpose, just pacing. And when I finally forced myself to sit up, the light vanished instantly, plunging the hallway back into darkness. And I waited, heart racing, for the sound of footsteps retreating, but nothing came. And the next morning, when I asked my grandmother if she'd been up during the night, she told me she hadn't left her room at all, and I tried to accept that answer. But the nights that followed only deepened the unease, because the awakenings continued and the sense of being watched grew stronger, until one night I woke to see a shape standing in my doorway, barely visible against the dark, tall and still. And I told myself it was a trick of shadows, that my eyes were adjusting, that fear was creating patterns where none existed. But the shape didn't shift or fade. As my vision cleared, it remained, and then it leaned forward slightly, enough for me to see that it had no features I could recognize, no face, just absence where one should have been. And I pulled the blanket over my head, my body frozen, waiting for something to happen, for it to move closer or disappear. And minutes passed, stretching painfully long, until I finally gathered the courage to peek out again. And the doorway was empty, the hall dark and quiet. And the next morning, when I told my grandmother what I'd seen, she grew uncharacteristically serious, asking me what time it happened. And when I told her, she went quiet, then admitted that when she was young, she had experienced the same thing in that house, waking at the same hour, seeing a figure that never spoke or moved, just watched. And that admission unsettled me more than denial ever could, because it meant what I saw wasn't new. And even now, when I wake suddenly in the night and the room feels just a little too aware of me, I remember that doorway, that faceless presence, and the chilling knowledge that some things wait patiently, generation after generation, for someone young enough to notice them again. The last memory is the one that made me stop believing that fear was always imaginary, because unlike the others, this one didn't stay contained to a single moment or place. And I was older by then, on the edge of adolescence, old enough to question things, but still young enough to trust adults completely. And it happened during a winter when my parents worked late, and I spent most evenings alone after school, locked inside a routine that felt safe until it didn't. And it began with the phone ringing at the same time every night, always just after sunset. And when I answered, there was never anyone on the other end, just silence, not static, not breathing, but a deliberate absence that made my skin crawl. And I told myself it was a wrong number, a glitch, anything reasonable, until one evening, I let the answering machine pick up instead. And later, when I replayed the message, there was still nothing, no voice, no sound yet. The machine recorded the full duration of the call, as if something had stayed on the line, listening. And the calls continued night after night. And with them came other changes, subtle at first. The feeling that the house was never quite empty, even when it should have been. Lights left on in rooms I hadn't entered. Doors unlocked that I was certain I'd secured. And one night, while doing homework at the kitchen table, I heard footsteps upstairs, slow and heavy, moving from room to room in a way that suggested familiarity. And I froze, listening as they stopped directly above me, and then, impossibly, began descending the stairs, each step deliberate, measured. And I remember standing there, heart pounding, staring at the doorway, waiting for someone to appear, rehearsing explanations that would make sense if it was my parents home early, but no one emerged. And the footsteps stopped just out of sight, close enough that I could feel presence without seeing it. And the phone rang then, shrill and sudden, shattering the silence. And when I answered, hand shaking, a voice finally spoke, not loudly, not threateningly, but calmly, using my name in a tone that suggested familiarity rather than menace. And I dropped the receiver, backing away in panic, because the voice sounded like mine, older but unmistakably similar. And I fled the house, waiting outside in the cold until my parents returned. And when they searched the house, they found nothing, no signs of entry, no malfunction with the phone line, no explanation that could hold up under scrutiny. And we moved soon after for unrelated reasons. But even now, when a phone rings unexpectedly, or I hear footsteps in an empty house, I remember that winter, that voice, and the terrifying realization that whatever was reaching out to me didn't need to break in. It already knew exactly where I was. As an adult, I've tried to explain these memories away with logic, psychology, and time, telling myself that fear distorts reality and that childhood imagination fills gaps we don't yet understand. But no explanation has ever fully erased the feeling that something real was happening when no one else was watching. Because the fear wasn't chaotic or random, it was precise, patient, and deeply personal. And what unsettles me most isn't what I saw or heard back then, but how consistent it all was. How each experience followed rules I didn't know how to recognize at the time, and even now. When I walk through a quiet house or wake suddenly in the middle of the night, there's a part of me that listens carefully, not for proof, but for patterns. Because some childhood fears don't disappear as we grow up. They simply learn to wait until we're old enough to remember them clearly. If these stories feel familiar to you, it's not because you're imagining things. It's because whatever watched us back then never stopped paying attention.